Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Security Dumpster Fire podcast. Today you've got myself, Simon, Ian, and Aid, and we're going to be talking about all things MSS, outsourced kind of security services, MDR, what the differences are, why you should use them, some of the problems with them, and some of the kind of ways to measure success and kind of efficacy of your service, and sort of things to watch out for in the technology they may use to determine success. I know personally I've used a lot of traditional MSS things, so I've been involved in completely outsourced SOCs and SIMs and put all this data in someone else's SIM. I've had hybrid ones where we've had people on premise, so a security operations team that was outsourced entirely but sitting on premise, which is quite expensive, quite an easy way to set the service up. And I've got a current model that we built at Just Eat where it's a hybrid. So I've got a security operations team and we manage our own SIM, but we have a 24/7 MSS doing kind of first line alerting and triage for us and helping us build use cases and those kind of things. But we still own all of our own data and do the kind of second and third line. So there's a lot of different ways of doing it. And then obviously MDR is a new kid on the block in this space that I'm not as familiar with, but I believe some of the other people on the call are. So we kind of delve into what that is and how that's different as well, I think.
And extended DR.
And the new Gartner buzzword.
Yeah, that's a new one on the block.
Don't let that confuse you. So you've got MDR, which is managed detection and response, which will probably be an external service. You've got EDR, which is endpoint detection and response, which will be a technology you put onto your endpoints. And as Simon is futures to, Gartner or someone's come up with another term, which is XDR for extended detection and response, which I guess is EDR plus some crazy magic like AI or something.
So shall I maybe try and kick off with a couple of the basics of what MDR was brought about to do, maybe? Full disclosure, Elementrix are an MDR company, but this isn't about advertising or anything like that. I'm going to try and give impartial decisions. And we're also not having a massive game of Find Wally either, no matter what Simon looks like today. But we are celebrating.
Well, just before we go any further, just to talk, we don't need to talk about it for those non-Liverpool fans, but beautiful, 30 years, yes. Pain.
So we'll now leave sports out of it because I'm a Liverpool fan. We could spend the whole time talking about that. Anyway, so MDR really started off with two real main tenets. And the main tenets are to detect the stuff that prevention controls are missing today and to reduce the dwell time that attackers spend on networks undetected. So the idea around, if we go back to the very early days of MSSPs or managed security services providers, and services shouldn't be a mystery to anybody. We all use services not only in our working life but in our home life as well. We'll have cleaners. We'll have people come to fix boilers. We don't do it all ourselves. We rely on experts supposedly, and I think that's where the MSS bit came out of. In the late 90s, the early 2000s, as the complexity of networks started to grow, the idea of that being a rich watering hole for attackers necessitated the need for somebody to watch out for that. It was a new expertise. It was new. People were coming in, entering networks, doing bad stuff and making off with things. So we came up with a way of looking at that, essentially monitoring alarms. If you think of your home alarm being monitored by a third party, that is exactly what an MSS would do. They would come in, look at the triggers, look at the alarms, and then alert you as the homeowner or the customer when that alarm triggered. A lot of the problems started happening when you do that on a network that you're unfamiliar with or how the business operates, that generates a lot of those false alarms known as false positives. So the managed security services themselves had to find a way of getting through the false positives and getting to what they used to term the needle in a haystack, i.e. the attacker within your network. Because if you keep sending people false positives, they will keep switching them off and keep ignoring them. And then that's when the attack surface grows for people. If you've got an alarm system that nobody pays any attention to, people can do harm. How many times have we heard in our neighborhood a burglar alarm going off or a car alarm going off, and we don't rush out the house to try and see who's breaking into stuff. We think, those bloody neighbours again with that car alarm. I wish they'd switch it off. They're interrupting Coronation Street or Emmerdale or whatever nonsense is being watched on TV. So it then generated a sales pattern around finding a needle in a haystack. And this is where I think the MSSPs then started setting up a rod for their own back in trying to make people feel that they had some kind of magic in there that would allow them to spot that needle within a massive haystack. And as data and networks grew, the haystack only got bigger. And we still kept getting attacks. We still kept getting breaches. And it was more or less the same things happening time and time again. Patches not there, people clicking on links, configs bad, default passwords left in, all of that stuff that we know. So the idea of doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results is the definition of insanity. I keep saying it. Einstein said it. I'll only repeat people who I look up to. So Einstein said it. So that's where MDR then came about. And MDR came about to try and answer that problem of true detection with true detective capabilities, rather than having a prevention-first approach where you're looking out to the outside world and thinking the threat's coming over the horizon to attack your castle, when actually more often than not, you need to take an inward approach and look inside and look at the types of techniques, the tactics and the procedures that are being employed by attackers to wander into your network freely undetected and go about their business. I think that's a decent enough primer. There's about 4 or 5 minutes there, maybe.
That's really good, because I certainly wasn't quite clear on the distinction between the two. And as Aid touched on when we were sort of doing a little pre-chat about this, you'll talk to most MSS providers and they'll tell you they're the right solution for you. So I think that's one of the challenges for people, isn't it? Is understanding what is the solution you need, and what's going to work best for your organisation, because they all tell you in my experience, they pretty much all tell you that they would work and be the best one for you.
Indeed. And most people, when people buy a service, when a provider or salesperson say, hey, we'll bespoke it to your network and we'll tune it, what they're actually meaning is they're not going to tune their service to your network. They're going to tune your network to their service. So they're going to cut your arms and legs off and try and make you fit in their black box that they've got to make their service easier, because they don't want to develop that any further. They've sunk a lot of development dollars into that service. They don't want to have to keep doing that time and time again when there's a new requirement from a customer. And I was a product manager of an MSSP for Symantec, and we lost a massive deal with a massive communications company because we wouldn't do exactly that. We would not bend to the customer's bespoke nature. And this was in the early days of MSSPs, around about 2002, but it was a massive multi-million-dollar deal because we weren't flexible enough. And I think what you talk about there, Kev, is that firms are still exhibiting that lack of flexibility, that inflexible nature of offering a service that the customer wants. And I know Aid has got some really good experience and some strong thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, back to your analogy of like working with a plumber or somebody to come in and fix your washing machine, right? You wouldn't go and phone somebody to fix your washing machine and they say, I only do Hoover washing machines and I've got a hot point. Well, I don't care, I only do Hoover, I'm going to fix it. The needs of different organizations are so varied, and I think the organizations that we work with as providers need to be varied as well, but also recognizing they need economies of scale to be able to do it at cost for us. And I think that's always a challenge, right? Is how to have this balance between the fact that an individual organization has got its own threat model, its own way of detecting its own noise, and being able to have that tunability to use the business intelligence, the business context, but at the same time be able to detect the bad guys. And I think, Ian, as you were saying, some of the larger MSSPs have failed miserably over the years to offer that ability to tune and ability to add your own business context into that. So you end up having to end up with your own shadow MSSP internally, because you end up flooded by alerts from that provider and you have to work out your own way of filtering it. So you end up with your own shadow level 1 doing the same job that you were hoping you were going to outsource anyway, right?
Indeed, and not all initial MSSPs were created equal either, right? So some did, and you're right, some specialised in the management of specific devices, the management of checkpoints and all of that stuff, and Pixas as they were back then, the Cisco firewall and all of that, but didn't do Dragon IDS for argument's sake, or didn't do something else, and therefore they couldn't cover your whole network or your whole infrastructure, and that's where the experts internally come in to try and to try and augment that stuff that you are paying an arm and a leg for a service. And you know, in some instances, rightly so, I would say for everybody paying for their managed services, in most of the instances, I think they're getting a better deal out of it than you in reality. When it comes to the fidelity of the information they're providing back to you, not everybody's like this, obviously, but when it comes to the fidelity of the alerts that are being provided to customers, I think a lot for the money you're asked each month for that, a lot is expected of you as a customer to then go and chase down that stuff and investigate it and triage it and come back to them and update them and tell them that it's another false positive. You know, it's one of the issues why Target was breached, that they were told a few 100,000 times, I'm exaggerating for effect, but they were told about the alert coming in, there was something there, but then they had to go and triage it. They kept getting more and more of these alerts and false positives. They were starting turning off to it, and then, you know, and then the worst happens, and then everybody stands back and goes, wasn't my problem, Gov, wasn't my fault. You'd be like, well, why have I just paid you the best part of X million dollars over the past couple of years for somebody to wander in, steal all of these creds and wander back out again?
That's a perfect example of
go on, Abe.
I was going to say that's a perfect example of where alert flood ends up in you know, a lack of return on investment. You have the security tools in there alerting, and then nobody's there to actually act on it, and that's a true problem. Sorry, Sam.
Yeah, no, just taking a step back, what is actually the point of a SOC? Because when you talk to the business side, sometimes it's difficult to articulate the value of why do we need a SOC in the organization. I've been working with an extremely large organization that's built actually a very sophisticated SOC over the last 15 years, but they are not seeing, they just see it as a cost center. They don't really see what they're getting from it. So they are now looking how they're going to outsource it. Do they go work with a strategic partner? Do they keep some of it? They see that their security teams don't necessarily integrate very well with the SOC. So you have a SOC that's looking for activity in their environment, but actually they don't work with the security engineers. They don't work with the other parts of security teams to actually, not just, they can do the triage, but actually mitigate some of those threats through infrastructure, or, you know, and that's where we had the whole SOAR architecture, where you come in and try to create playbooks. But I don't necessarily see that joined up in organizations. They don't work with the other parts of security. So again, we see siloed teams. And I'm talking about large companies that have the resources to have lots of teams. It's going to be different in smaller organizations. But again, from the business perspective, what is the value that it's providing? Is it providing an early warning that we've been hit? Is it providing an instant response? Because some of them will say, I don't want to manage any of that. I'll outsource it, and SLAs will be tight. And then if there's any impact, we're going to say, okay, you come in and clean it up, and it's at your cost. So they're starting to look at it in a different way. So I'm just interested in getting your thoughts there on how the business views SOC.
So I think there's probably a distinction. I don't know if it's a distinction, but I certainly include SOC as part of security operations. So we have kind of effectively a frontline security team who deal with all the incidents and do a lot of the kind of operational things, whether it's facing people for vulnerability management stuff, doing threat intel, the kind of day-to-day security BAU stuff. And so SOCs, the SOC part is part of that, and we currently have a blended environment. So I have outsourced MSS, as we touched on, that does the kind of 24/7 thing, because for me that had cost benefits versus trying to build a 24/7 team and manage it internally. Yeah, that may change as we grow. But so the security operations and SOC are kind of one big team that deals with operational things. So incidents get surfaced, they then deal with remediating them, which probably we'll touch on some of the stuff Ian talks about, where the MSS in traditional sense will do, here's your alerting, here's stuff we've done some triage on, we think it's legit. but then they give it to you to fix. Whereas I'm guessing the R part of the MDR helps some of the remediation further, so it's a bigger assistance. But I think some of what you touched on, Sam, is more team thing. So your security operations and SOC, well, the value is they'll spot and deal with incidents. They'll hopefully spot some things before they become big issues, maybe even before, they become anything, just based on saying behavior change or whatever, depending how mature your monitoring is. So they detect, respond, and prevent incidents, meaning that as a business value, say for example you have an account takeover attack or something obvious, right? And if it's got round your defenses, so they're taking over accounts, if there wasn't a SOC and a SecOps team or whatever your thing is, who would spot that? Who would be dealing with it? Who would be stopping thousands of customers' accounts being taken over? My team jump in and start making, if they have to make changes to our defenses, start resetting accounts, block IP addresses, whatever they can do to start preventing that. So they deal with the incident as well as detecting it. So it's that response part that adds the real business value, which is we spot things and then we respond to them and prevent them becoming big incidents to your organization. So for me, that's the big value of SecOps, is that, and also have to integrate with other teams. So in your example, I think the problems there were around bad team integration as much as anything else. You had an ops team that found stuff, then just didn't know what to do with it or didn't work well with others, whereas my team was
ticketing systems.
Yeah. So we've got Jira, we've got Slack, all of those things. So if there's an incident, we spin up a Slack channel for the incident, we invite the right people to Slack channel, people swarm all over it and do whatever we can to deal with it as quickly as possible. And that's more of an organizational thing than a SecOps thing. I think
that's not necessarily prevalent across the industry. I'd say many just use a ticketing system. It goes into the ether and then somebody picks it up or not. And that again, you're more of a DevOps style organization, so that naturally works for you. But if all more organizations is maybe less about technology and again, process and people, you've got the right kind of communication methods in play, then they're going to move a lot quicker than they would through a ticketing system.
Yeah, so I think a lot of that's kind of around your organization and how you integrate, right? And it's no good, probably to Ian's point around MSSs, it's no good if someone just throws a ticket somewhere, whether I'm an internal SOC or an external SOC, if I just create a ticket and chuck it somewhere, the incident's still happening. I haven't really prevented anything. If I create a ticket, invite the right people into it, get everyone engaged that needs to fix it and drive it through to remediation, then you've added huge value because you found it and fixed it effectively.
I think
you're talking about SecOps.
From you're just making words up now, by the way.
Trying to get a job with Gartner, right?
I think so. So I think for me, SOC has always been a sensitive theatre, right? It shouldn't matter. It shouldn't matter unless you're a government facility. I get the behind closed walls and all that. It should not matter whether you are in a room together with a fancy LED wall display that is showing an attack moving across the internet from point to point, which, by the way, has never happened in any SOC I've ever been in, ever, and I've been in lots. So all of that Hollywood stuff is absolute nonsense. But it was always theatre, and we had, when we first started at Symantec, we had a nuclear bunker, which we called the Teletubby House, because that's exactly what it looked like. It was a big mound. It was a nuclear bunker. And it was a sales tactic. It was to bring people down and go, oh, these people take security a bit seriously. They've got a nuclear bunker. It was absolutely nonsense. You couldn't get stuff in there. Getting in decent bandwidth was a nightmare. Expanding it was a nightmare because a part of it was listed. It was just stupid. It really was. And again, one of the other SOCs we were in had a big glass wall with curtains that you pressed that just kind of parted to reveal the SOC floor. Mm-hmm. And you have to be careful when you part those curtains because it depends what the guys are watching on the screen.
Yeah. So I always love it when you go to kind of a company that's selling you these services and they always trot you around their shiny SecOps room, right? And there's a bunch of people. Half the time it's almost empty as well. You're like, who on earth is doing work here? Because you've got to fill the room with people. But there'll be a bunch of screens on the wall and alerts and stuff. And it is meaningless because for a while my team we've got like a rotating screen of stuff that sits behind my team in the office. We haven't got SecOps, and it goes to the security internet to remind people about that. But one of the pages was the Norse map, right? Which is just, for those who aren't familiar, it's just basically an internet attack map that just shows stuff going across the world and all these attacks. And that one got the most interest. People are like, what's that? Wow, what's going on with that? So it is just that theatre thing, and that got the most people talking to my team in terms of what was on the screen out of anything we've ever put up there, despite being meaningless.
Yeah, I mean, we're prone to do a bit of Penn and Teller, but having run multiple SOCs and having customers come in to visit, I mean, I'm just going to share that people would ship in people from engineering teams, development teams, just to sit at desks to make it look full, because you don't have a full SOC the whole time. And yeah, you're absolutely right. And the curtains come open and people are on lunch eating sandwiches all around the desks and everything. It's like, but when you have a visit, you make damn sure the sandwiches are cleaned up and everyone's doing something, clicking, even if they've never worked in the SOC
Halo,
before.
aren't they?
Oh,
With the big
dear.
screen. That's what they're there for.
They mentioned Penn and Teller. We'll all be ejected from whatever the security.
I'm never going to work in a SOC again, or at least when somebody comes to visit, they're always going to ask. So actually, for me, SOC and security operations is around the application of intelligence in the areas where it can't be automated to make risk-based decisions. So, for example, you have threat intelligence that we're needing to apply over a number of sensors, different types, network, logs, endpoints. And we've got business intelligence. We've got the knowledge of what applications are supposed to be doing, what people are supposed to be doing, what they're not. And in my mind, we should be working as an industry to do whatever the bloody hell we can to automate all of that stuff. But at the end of the day, there is stuff that we can't automate. There is stuff that we have to be looking at information and data and making decisions. And that's where I think SOC and security operations comes into. It's in the application of human brain intelligence and risk decision-making skills to look at data and make a judgment call as to whether escalate something or not. Yep. And we can, organizations rely really heavily on frontline security operations staff to make these risk-based decisions. And it's sometimes pretty scary because you're looking at somebody that's relatively junior to look at an alert or not look at an alert. And you already mentioned, Ian, about an organization that was in that sort of situation. It's like, so you've got somebody that is making a risk-based decision who's not particularly skilled at doing so through operational playbooks and workbooks. And I think the more mature service capabilities you can buy is they're automating that decision making as best as possible, where you outsource a lot of the data munging to make risk-based decisions, and then you rely on SOC and your security operations team to be able to work out how to apply that intelligence against your business and what's happening in the business to say, is this actually a problem or not? So I think, SOC is, for me, applying human minds to a problem that we haven't yet automated yet.
But that question, I think, is a wide one, as maybe where MSSP shoot themselves in the foot. That needle in a haystack answer to the question of what do you guys do? It's too wide, it's too woolly, and I think that's where MDR tries to change that questioning and that ability. MDR tries to turn around and say, we know you're penetrated, we know all your prevention controls are easily bypassed, so let us keep a watchful eye on that. It's not to say you're bad at configuration. It's not to say those controls are useless. They're part of the answer. But actually, a true defense in depth approach is not just having 4 of the same firewalls. It's having a prevention, a detection, and a response capability that you can adequately depend upon. So when you've got the prevention bit, if you want to add the detection and the response capabilities, that's where the MDR bit comes in. Now, if only that were that simple, right? And if only the MDR community played nice, and if only the MDR was all around detection and response. But what you then have to do with the service providers coming out in this quadrant, in this market, you have to be able to decipher what their MDR means. Now, it can be made up of multiple things, right? But generically, it comes from a list of threat intelligence, threat hunting, endpoint detection response and threat hunting, advanced network detection, whatever that means, deep and dark web recon, and then other people will add such things to it like honeypots and things like that. Some people will add advanced SIEM or SOAR capabilities, again, whatever that means. The advanced bit is the key in there. But not all of them offer all of them or offer all the same things. Some of them will offer their own stack called pure play vendors or providers, and some will offer other people's stacks. Some will only offer a managed EDR capability. Some will only offer a managed threat hunt and go NTA, network threat attack type capability. So there's still, the market's still shaken down. The market's still kind of consolidating. I think yesterday, a provider in the US was bought by somebody for $29 million of a of an MDR startup, you know. So there's a lot of hotness in the market. It's almost like the solar system coalescing into planets, you know. You'll get 7 or 8 big ones revolving around the sun. That sun's usually Gartner, right? Because they say kind of what the phrases and terms are, and everybody else falls into their gravity. I've gone a bit all Brian Cox there for a second, haven't I? But you know, so even going into that market, it's a bit of a minefield when you go into that market as well, of understanding and picking apart the different services and what that means to you. But what you should be able to get as a consumer of this, you should be able to get better answers for your use cases that you want to be answering, you know. And when people talk to me about, I give them an analogy that if you think of what you're doing currently on your network or with other service providers as the general army, think of the MDR as the special forces you send in to get the hostages out, you know.
So you've touched on a couple of really good things the last year and 8. So I guess one thing's obviously most organizations aren't as well documented and don't necessarily like have everything captured as well as they should in terms of what are our crown jewels, what do we really care about, those kind of things. So in terms of insourcing versus outsourcing, having some people as part of your security operations, SecOps, whatever, that are on your premise and employed by you, or not necessarily employed by you, but they're the whole time and part of your business and involved in things like production meetings and other stuff. So they really understand stuff, I think potentially has some value in terms of they know what really matters. When they see an alert, to Adrian's point about judgment calls, they may be much better placed to make that judgment call versus someone in a managed service of whatever sort that has 17 customers they look after and doesn't really know any of them well. And then I had another point around the response piece, and then also the kind of to the response piece as well, having how do you best get those relationships going. So I guess in terms of as an outsourced provider, Ian, and to some extent AJ, the current role, I guess, how do you guys, or how do you think we can best get the outsourced service as close as it can be to an in-source one? Because I recognise there are huge benefits of it. You know, for me, as someone who's got a SecOps team, having a full 24/7 service and all of the capabilities you get with it is a hugely expensive thing to do internally and try to skill up and manage people and have, you know, even things like shift rotations and having people on shift that are those kind of stuff is a huge overhead. So being able to outsource some of this and get huge value has a massive benefit, both in terms of cost and effort for companies, but also has that separation of, do they know us as well? Oh, that's what use cases. Also making sure you've got the right use cases. So I guess it's how do you get the MSS service close enough to your business they really understand it, and how do you, or how can we make sure that we have the right use cases? Because my team come up with 30 use cases and you might be like, actually 15 of them are stuff we've never seen ever. Do you really want us to, do you want to pay us to, you know? So how do we make sure we're getting the best value in the MSS, who has hundreds or thousands of use cases across all these different organizations, help us with what are the best ones for us?
So use cases is an interesting one, actually. What a true MDR should be doing for you is providing you with an approach to proactively go after the attacks and the attackers that regularly bypass the attack defenses, right? So they should already have a bunch of these threat detection profiles and use cases that they're bringing to you guys. They should also have the flexibility. If you say we are a thing and this is specific to us and I've never seen it anywhere else, they should also have the flexibility to build that into their hypothesis. Because what MDR should base themselves around is a hunting mentality and hypothesis that is all about telemetry and is all about looking for indicators of compromise. And when I talk about indicators of compromise, I'm not just talking about MD5 hashes that most threat intel firms will provide you with, right? I'm talking about using a diamond model of detection and all of that stuff, and actually understanding how attackers get in, move about, the infrastructure they use, the way they... So when you start thinking about it and building it into things like the MITRE ATT&CK framework, actually, you will start to understand that the way people get into your network is all the same generally, right? Is all the same. What differs is what they're after and then how they move about within your network, which is one of the reasons why red teams are so successful, right? When they come onto your network to do a test, they are moving about places in your operating systems that you've never thought to look in before, because nobody has ever told you that that's what living off the land means, and that's how they get into your network and move east to west across. This is one of the things that MDRs should be put to the test to as well. you're going to spend a lot of money on an MDR, by the way. Put them through the paces. Make sure they live to the height that they're offering you. Make sure you can test them. And then start talking to them about your specific use cases. And don't take we'll build that in for you. Ask them where they've done that previously. Ask them where they've taken a difficult use case and have built it in. Ask them where their threat hunters have found something they've never seen before and have chased it down through the kill chain to come up with a brand new threat and a brand new hunt to build into what they then offer the rest of their customers. I'll just touch on one more point before Aid comes in, because I know he's got a lot of good info on this as well. The benefit as well of having a managed service provider or managed detection response provider who knows their salt is, whilst your use cases are specific to you, it's like the unanswered question in a room when everybody else is thinking the same unanswered question, right? They will see things across other customers and other networks that you and your guys will never think of, and they can bring that add a bit. So it's that symbiotic relationship. It's the bit with the customer and the bit with the provider. And actually, most MDR teams should be a bit smaller. Be wary of MSSPs who rebadges MDR, by the way. We can come to that later. But it's that symbiotic, trusted relationship. Aid?
We can't hear you, Aid. I think you changed your microphone off.
Thank you. I think there's a couple of canary metrics for... Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Beautiful. Still getting used to this Zoom thing. It's only been like 3.5 months now.
And we're not even on Zoom.
It's now just become a noun.
Everybody.
Okay, canary metrics for managed services, right? If you're engaging with an organization, the first thing they start talking to you about is what log sources do you want us to monitor? That's a real telltale sign you're talking to the wrong company, right? If somebody's talking to you and starting to say, okay, this is the mapping we have in current capabilities against something like MITRE, and these are the log sources you need to enable this with us, and this is what needs to be in those log sources, that's the really good metric. And to a little bit of like Ian's point there about gauging how they're evolving, right? Ask them, can you show me your mapping of a year ago against MITRE, and let's see where you've come from then to now. Right, I would want to be, when I'm procuring a managed service, having the service provider sitting down with me and having some real risk-based and threat modeling discussions to identify what's important to us as an organization, and then shaping the scope of the service around that to sort of help me as an organization understand where my gaps are going to be even after I've deployed this service, and not, hey, we've got 1,000 use cases and we're going to solve every single problem you've got. I want to know the edge of that service. I want to know what you can't detect. I also want to have discussions with a service provider which is open and frank about which environments or aspects of my environment will be covered and in what timeframes. Because all too often I've sat with senior security leaders who have had the team go through and done a big procurement, and happy days, it's been rolled out. 15 out of the 16 log sources are all ingested. Great, project finished, right? And then you suddenly find out that your cloud environment's not covered, or a particular bunch of data centers or applications that are actually where your crown jewels sit. So I'd rather see a mapping of capability with environment and maturity to have a discussion with. And Ian, your point around how an organization and the service provider work, yeah, it's got to be like this. And both teams have got to be building scenarios and hypotheses to develop a continual improvement of detection capabilities. And all too often, the service provider is very much operating in silo to what's happening in the organization. But the organization, in my mind, needs to be having almost a shared access to that platform where they can add their own hunt hypotheses into the tool. They can start crafting draft searches or their own stuff to a point where they can then hand it over to the service provider and say, hey, I've now been applying my business context to the point where it's reasonably tuned. I want you to onboard that. In a way that's not going to cost you £20,000 every time you ask that, right? And that's another thing to look out for. What's the rate of change? How much can I evolve this service with you without me hitting the ceiling and ending up having a massive contract change? I don't know if that was answering some of those questions, Kevin. I can talk about this for hours, but...
that's one of those really interesting ones, isn't it? Which is, you pay for X things a month, And does that mean if you go over X things a month, you'll get breached and they won't tell you? You know, I often wonder about some of those kind of things. Another one that Adrian and I was talking about on WhatsApp a day or two ago was around how you measure the success of the service. So most of them word detection or response time in terms of from when they detect something to when something's done about it. But that doesn't cover off the fact it took them a day to detect it. Obviously, you need to be working together on that to make sure they get the logs and the data they need. But assuming you've done that pre-work, I would love to see providers that said, if we do the agreed pre-work and we get what we get the data we need that we tell you we need, we will commit to a response time of from when the incident happened, not from when we detect it. Because for me, that's the only way you can have success. Talking about the value of security is I can say to my business that we have, you know, we detect 99.9% of all incidents within 10 minutes for happening, and we started responding within 30 minutes, et cetera, and then you can measure your efficacy on those remediation times and how quickly you get stuff dealt with, as opposed to, well, we fixed it within half an hour of finding it, but we didn't find it for 4 days.
Yeah.
But that's, so, you know, that's when it comes to dwell time and things like that, and that's quite important. And I would be wary of that. I used to write those SLAs, right? We will notify you within 10 minutes of a determination of a breach. Determination is the important word in that sentence, because it's down to us to determine. We could have been working on that for 3 years. As soon as we determine it's a breach, then the clock starts ticking. So it's kind of a false sense of security or a false sense of efficacy. That shorter time. If anybody's telling you that they're going to do this stuff in a short time frame, I would start to question that, right? What you've got at the moment is you've got dwell times of between 3 to 9 months and even longer, depending who you listen to, who's got stuff to sell, right? What you've got is a long dwell time for somebody to be on your network or a compromise to be on your network and go undetected, right? If you think that that's measured in months, what you should be looking at for proper investigation, for proper validation, for proper containment and remediation and response, you should be looking for a response in hours or days, not minutes or seconds. If you can get down to that, you're then pushing the envelope. That's brilliant. But anybody who's telling you, I've got automation or I've got this ML and we're going to do this in 4 seconds, give them a kick in the balls from me, because they're lying to you, right?
But that's I'd much rather honesty, right? No one wants to say a Sev 1 we guarantee within a day, but I'd rather see that and it be true than they have this kind of vague wording that means actually it could be found at any point and they're still within SLA.
Yep. Simon.
Sorry, Simon.
Well, I have a question, right? So we talked a lot about dwell time on networks, but what happens when the organization is heavily in cloud or in SaaS? So for example, that organization I mentioned before, they're literally moving thousands of their critical applications to the cloud, and they're building heavily in the cloud. So the concept for them of the network is slowly disappearing. It's always going to be a hybrid environment, but and obviously it's a very different set of challenges when you're in the cloud. You need to understand the identity. You need to understand the privileges that you have. What's your take on this and where that? Because I guess the industry is going to take some time before it catches up to that paradigm. But what's your take on that, on how we're going to deal with SaaS environments, with OT environments, with cloud environments?
Yeah, I think that's a massive elephant in the room with many services, and it goes back to what I was suggesting there about having threat model and risk-based decisions on capability and not it just being on log sources. I've worked on a few organizations where, you know, service as usual has been ticking along on the SOC that they've had for a couple of years, right? And then whole change programs have moved from traditional IT and data centers into cloud and applications heading over there. And when you sit down and just go, so what are you actually monitoring right now? You realize what you're monitoring is absolutely, well, not a lot. And all your assets are over here, right? But everyone's very happy with the numbers of incidents that have been detected each month and the SLA on how fast it took to get the tickets done. Everyone's happy, but there's a massive kind of unmonitored part of your network. So yeah, it's got to be application of business context into that service to allow it to evolve. So I think you want to work with service providers that are having regular service reviews with you, that are asking you questions like, what's happening in your IT change program? What's happening in mergers and acquisitions? Where are all these blind spots that we've got right now? The biggest question should be asked every time, what are we not able to detect right now? And
because the tooling changes, right? If you're going to the cloud, you're going to have a different type of tooling that you need to detect.
No,
account compromise or whatever. No.
No. You would think that, but no. The attacks and the procedures and the approaches are still the same. They may come in through a different way, and they may exploit bad practices in CI/CD pipelines or things that aren't configured properly and things like that. But actually, you should still be able to use a similar type of architecture that should be as equivalent to the cloud as it is to an on-prem network as well. You should be able to.
So you're going to be taking VPC logs and things like that.
Yes, so you'd have different log sources or different sources of data that you're looking at, but the attacks that you'll be looking for will be similar, right? Because I'm going to be getting onto a machine, so I'll be doing privilege escalation, account takeover. I'm going to be trying to exfiltrate data, so you're going to see data going somewhere it's never gone before, that kind of thing. So I think the behaviors you're looking for will be the same because I'm trying to do the same things, but the data source you use to understand those things might change.
Yeah.
Correct. And somebody's mentioned it well, actually, you've all mentioned it at one point in here. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, logs, right?
All of the logs, all of the time, right?
Logs are not necessary for good detection. I said it. Logs are not necessary for good detection. Logs are great for certain use cases. If you want to do retrospection, if you want to do forensics, you need all of those logs. And yes, you can do certain forms of detection with logs. But actually, it is not necessary to take a log from a machine centrally and put it somewhere and imagine magic to happen in what is essentially a glorified syslog server running an SQL database backend, right? You do not need that for effective detection. You need great hypotheses. You need great telemetry. You need think of what I abhor hunting from a live hunting in all its forms, right? But think of what a hunter does. They don't then go after their prey and stalk their prey with an air rifle, right? They go after their prey with the right tools. They understand where their prey inhabits. They understand what their eating habits are. They understand what their killing habits are. They understand where they are on that savannah, right? It's exactly the same for what we have to do as hunters when we go after our prey proactively on networks. We don't just go, right, give us all of that data on there and we'll find it somewhere. It's meticulous. It's deliberate. It's not a half-assed approach scattergun thing where, send me all the logs and it's the story I tell all the time of the kids waking up in the morning on the birthday and their room is full of horse shit and they're digging through the horse shit furiously and the parents come in and say, what are you doing? Say, well, it's my birthday. The room's full of horse shit. There's got to be a pony in here somewhere. No, there hasn't.
You're an evil parent. But I think that's a great point, right? Which is, so as an example, if you're looking for a lot of the kind of like system behavior changes that are going to happen when something's compromised, right? Something like, I can't think of a better product, but something like an App Dynamics or something that understands what talks to what. If you've got a map of that, all I need to do is see that this component has had a different connection to normal or has talked to somewhere it never talked to before, and that could be suspicious. And I've got no actual logs from that component. I've just seen a behavior change in that component.
Yeah.
So I think for me, it all comes down to how do I understand behavior change? Because it's system behavior, component behavior, user behavior, whatever it is, it's going to do something different to normal.
But how many providers actually have that understanding and then hook into those types of tools, depending what their customers have? I'm guessing it's very little.
But that question could also be phrased: how many providers do this well?
Yeah. There's that. I've got a we can pin it to the link maybe when it goes out. I've got a Gartner report that talks about the current state of the not about us, the current state of the MDR market and all the different providers. So I'm really careful about not being a pitch by me. I'm trying to give my experience in this marketplace. I'll happily put that out there as well, by the way. It talks about all of them, all the big players as well.
But for me, I think regardless of whether you go MDR, MSS, or all internal, focusing on behavior of your systems is the key thing for all security stuff, right? Because it's always going to have to change if something bad's happened. If I compromise your system and there's no behavior change, I haven't changed anything, and therefore I'm not doing anything apart from maybe watching. So obviously you might want to watch that, but it's still going to be a connection somewhere unusual or a different time or something else, right?
That's part of it. That's part of the hypotheses. Or sometimes there will be that compromise and they're just lying in wait to understand the behaviors on the network. And so there's that bit to still think about and go after and detect as well.
Where do
I
we
guess
see
you-
things going? Because now, go on, Kev.
Sorry, Sam. I was going to say, even in that situation, it may be hard to spot, but someone's going to have clicked a link or downloaded something. There's going to be a payload running somewhere in memory or doing something, right? So otherwise, they're not in.
Correct.
Sorry,
Correct.
Simon.
And that's where logs help, by the way. Sorry, Simon.
Yeah.
Go on.
No, just interested. Obviously now Microsoft are building out a fairly Microsoft-centric platform, which is ingesting telemetry from, Windows devices, from actually from the CI/CD pipeline if you're using GitHub and their VSTB, which is a pipeline tooling. So they're starting to pull all that telemetry together. They put it into a graph database, and then they start to look at that activity themselves. So is that the way that the industry is going? You're going to get ever more telemetry, and you'll make spinning that up into a model, a data model that you can get meaning from it, much like Facebook and LinkedIn, for example, would do. Is that the future for us or for the industry?
Hey, do you want to have a go at that? You're on mute again, man.
I'm trying to stop the echo. I think the challenge has always been trying to bring the data together in the right place where you can start lunging across it and finding stuff. And the problem is everybody's been trying to centralize data to be able to look in it, and we're trying to find faster ways of doing stuff. And there is no amazing way of doing this. We're just going to see more and more new generations to be able to hunt across larger data in shorter periods of time. I think, however it's presented, we still need to apply the question over the top of it. And that question is either known TTPs or threat stuff we've seen somewhere else, or it's back to Kevin's point around behavior. Is this weird or is this not weird? And I think I'm probably not answering your question directly, Simon, but there's some interesting stuff that's linking to the last couple of other questions. Is once you've got your data there and anomalies start to surface within that, you can have a layer of people in the way of finding the answer, which is the SOC or the people that are interpreting that alert, or potentially you can go direct to the user. And there's some interesting services that I've been working with, and the project I was working on a year or so ago where we started to do distributed alerting, and we started to actually ask the end user. So we started to use Slack and things like that, where we would say, hey, one of our little detection alerts has just triggered off, and we've just seen a new repo that's just been opened to the internet. Are you sure you needed to do that? And Slack would automatically ask them, and they'd be like, oh shit, no, I didn't, because we gave them a link on what to click on to shut that down. So actually, in that sense, we use automation to actually validate the security threat and bypass the SOC completely. And I think there's a real opportunity for service providers there to start looking at those models more, because to some of what Ian was saying earlier, it's like we were as industry, throwing way too much ticketing across at users, who then had to end up like going, okay, what do I look at here? I mean, say users, I mean sort of operations centers. They still ended up with a flood of tickets coming in, and that was it. But if we can create almost like a triangle here, where you've got the service provider deploying their technology, just detecting things, sending messages out to end users or the SOC to start to apply business intel and user intel at the same time, then you're onto a winner. Because I think having a small team of people in an organization trying to answer very quickly, is this real or is this not? Is this a threat or not? Yeah, you're on a lost leader here. That's how alerts get missed. But if we can actually somehow start to bring in the user who's clicking on that thing 10 minutes before and ask them, did they actually mean to click on that, without actually needing to log a ticket, then you're on a real winner at that point, because then you can then integrate that context and just get the alert flowing high.
So it's building that user interactivity.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, if you got an email, if you received an email and you clicked on a link and it installed a backdoor, and then 10 seconds later you get an alert that comes through from Slack saying, "Oh, did you know something just got installed on your machine? Did you mean for that to happen?" And if you don't reply in 10 minutes, it flags up a higher priority into the SOC than if you did. You can use all that automation to really cut out a bunch of this life cycle here.
Or you could do other things like integrate into the MFA tool, to enforce a step-up process or another login, or do something. So there's other remediation techniques that you could then start to do once you have
Absolutely.
that kind of.
You can start to do things like Hey, by the way, you've just turned off your MFA on such and such a SaaS system. Did you mean to do that? Because that's not in policy right now. And then you sort of give them the opportunity to write in a reason. No ticket was needed to be logged by an analyst. So the cost base suddenly comes down of this kind of incident response, I suppose.
I think that's also a great example of finding out sometimes when you have flawed processes. So you may find have an example where something we had an example recently where an S3 bucket went public and or got created as public, and we have automated alerts for that. So my team went and asked, and it turned out someone had created one because they requested to, but they weren't sure what it was for. And then when we found out what it's for an internal use only. So why was it? Yeah. So you kind of bottom out where there's been kind of a process gap where someone had asked something that wasn't quite what they needed. Someone else had just blindly done it without asking why. And then actually what they needed was an internal one for some email stuff or whatever. So you can actually help people where you find gaps in process, so everyone thinks they're doing the right thing, but actually it was a slightly incorrect request actioned by someone who thought they should just do it, rather than going back and saying, "Are you sure?" But yeah, so that alerting is really, that kind of alerting is really useful.
I'm surprised that you didn't have a pattern for that, a template that you can click that it spins up with an S3 bucket.
Well, it's a little anecdote. Back in early 2000s.
I've got to jump, everybody. Sorry, guys, but you keep talking. I just want to say Liverpool. Bye, everybody. See you
later, mate. See you next week.
Simon. See you, Simon.
Yeah, there was an interesting anecdote. I used to work in Sony probably about 18 years ago. We used to do lean manufacturing tool sets and alerting systems for when factory lines went down. And normally the little red light would come up on the machine and somebody would go over and give it a kick or pull out whatever was jamming it. And if that kick hadn't happened, hopefully somebody else across the factory floor would see the red light was still flashing, right? But it was always very, very manual, and we developed a tool set that would sort of say, okay, well, this machine's not been doing anything for 5 minutes. Send a pager, back in the day, a pager to the line supervisor, and then if they didn't answer that and get the machine running 20 minutes later, it would go to the factory floor shift leader, etc., etc. And we implemented this tool set one night. And the next morning we had the factory general manager on the phone, livid, just going, I was getting these texts coming all night, bloody giving me a go, saying shit's been going on, and I've been at work, it's 11 o'clock, and not one person's come and told me that there were any issues last night, your software's completely broken. We looked into it, no, the line had been down all night, and nobody had actually been told about it. So if we bring that into security world, where the CISO is getting escalated about stuff that's actually going on and live, but we have the ability to have this tiered escalation, I think that'll be a nice dream to have in sort of service providers, the security, I think.
Yeah, so yeah, we have some of that. Interesting how people hang on to tools. It's a tool called PagerDuty that obviously doesn't page anyone anymore, but we have we programmed in tiered escalations for that. Yeah. I did have one other question or point I wanted to raise on this as well, mostly around kind of SIMI logging kind of stuff, but often with managed service providers, you have to use their solution. So you can end up very tied into them. So we had a requirement that we wanted to manage our own SIMs. Obviously, we were quite limited on the providers we could talk to, but I've been through the pain of moving before. So kind of obviously the benefits of using their own tool is that they have one pane of glass and they can have lots of customers and all their team know how to use it. But the downside is you are very tied in. You've got 20, 30,000 things, especially if it's more traditional infrastructure and some of it's servers you don't like making changes on too often and whatever else, all putting data into SIMX, get past obviously because they might not all have to, but you've got a bunch of data sources going, it's going to be quite a few, however good you are at this, going to some SIM service here, moving to a new provider means you've got to change all of your logging infrastructure to something else, as well as moving providers. What may not have an answer, but I guess to make people aware that that's a thing, and there are some providers out there that don't require you to do this. But I guess what are your thoughts on the pros and cons of data in one place that you have the expertise on versus maybe you might only support a couple of SIMs. It might be you choose you're going to be an MSS that only supports Splunk, for example, or Logarithm or whatever your SIM of choice is, but you support a couple, so you don't need to understand loads, but you let people use their own versus it being yours.
I think that's a discussion on the exit procedure, right? Because Aid will tell you, in our experience, customers do outsource, co-source, in-source, and then kind of go on that merry circle and keep going on it for years and years and years. So if you know at some point you're going to move away, and the average tenure is 3 years or so before they move to someone else, maybe, You want to know what's going to happen and what's going to happen with your data and how you're going to port it away from them. I think the trick of the big SIs years ago was to lock you in, and that's where a lot of the technical debt happens nowadays. Or we're locked it. Well, why are you running Windows 7? Because the SI put that in and blah blah blah, and we can't move away from it, and we haven't got an idea who coded it, and all that type of stuff, right? So that's why that technical debt exists. I think if your data is that important that you want to run your own game on a SIEM, but maybe have somebody look at that outside office hours or at weekends, augment your staff when they're not there to give you 20. There's lots of firms out there that will do that now. I think there's more choice now, Kev, that can actually fit in with that. Back in the day, there wasn't. It was either that box or that service or those devices, or you didn't get anything at all, or you made your own up. And I think that is one of the things that I get the need for internal operations. I don't get the need for an internal SOC as a service, as that type of thing.
Yeah.
For me, I think it's a vanity project for a lot of executives to say, we've got our own SOC. Why would you want to, Ferrari don't kind of turn around and say, or rather, if you're buying a Formula One car, you're expecting everything to come from that, right? You're expecting that to be everything that you're buying from that service provider. Why would you then buy that or buy part of that and want to build the rest of it yourself and then compete at the highest level in the Grand Prix? I kind of don't get those type of rationales. I get the second, third line stuff. I get all of that. I get the internal operations and the triage and all of that stuff. I don't get this idea of let's get a bunch of security experts and all this security technology and take 3 or 4 years to build to parity what I can buy from the market already as a service. That's the bit I struggle with.
Vendor lock-in. Yeah. So I've got a couple of views on this one. One is around the logs. And I think any SIM or SOC implementation I've ever been involved in, the biggest, most complicated bit is getting the log sources in to look at log data for whatever use cases you're needing that for. That's always the biggest pain in the arse, and you're working with all the service providers, and it's just that takes months. So worked with a few organizations of late where we've been looking at log aggregation layers, and we've been looking at ways to almost leave in your log collection infrastructure so that you are centralizing it into a place, and you then ask your service providers to tap off of that. So you can use things like Azure and Event Hub and data analytics or Kafka and things like that, where you are basically saying, hey, service provider, we've already got that bit sorted for you. Can you just plug and play into the feed of data? The other side that is a bit more tricky is, I think, around the application of threat intel. And I think when an organization forces a service provider to use a non-standard for them sensor, be it network or endpoint, you are basically tying their hands behind their back a little bit more and potentially diluting their ability to do the service. Because, for example, if you've got a team of analysts who are having to get used to using CrowdStrike, CyberReason, FireEye, and all kinds of stuff, they're never going to be experts in any one of those. But if you're working with a service provider where they're using their preferred tool, you're more likely to get a much faster and better quality of service from that. And I think, yeah, it's a real tricky one there. I think there are certain technologies and sensors that it is a good idea to be locked in on, because it's best to breed for that service provider and you'll get the best service out. But I also understand that you might want to be making technology decisions to swap things in and out. So to that end, it's about having things like network taps or the ability to rapidly deploy agents and take them back out, and making sure your deployment tools are seamless as much as anything. But yeah, there's no right or wrong there, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess one we're probably pretty much out of time, I think, for this be quite a long chat. One final thought was, obviously we've talked quite a lot about talking to your MSS or your MDR provider and working with them on use cases and how you test it and everything else. So is it fair to say that even if you're someone, no, maybe more to Ian, but even if, or just general guidance, if you're it makes sense to have some security capability internally, even if you're using a managed service provider. Otherwise, how do you know you're getting the right service from them?
Yeah, and that's part of that. that's part of that relationship. That's got to come back. We talked about trust in one of the very early podcasts we did, right? You've got to have that trust. You've got to believe what these guys are saying after they've gone through a process of proving to you that they are correct in what they're saying and that meets your use cases. You've got to feel comfortable in that. They've also got to get a feel of your business and the use cases and the particular problems you're trying to wrestle with, and I think unless it's a provider that is answering all use cases, but that rarely happens that you get all them answered. You should see part of that as warning signs. If they then turn around and go, yeah, we can do that, yeah, we can do that, yeah. There's got to be a little bit of reality where they go, actually, that's where we stop. We don't do that. Yeah, you want us to come in and give you a bit of a massage after you've been at the gym, but that's not what we do, or at least we don't do it for free, right? There's got to be, or that use case you're giving us, we don't do that. We don't work with a SIEM, or we don't do this, or we don't manage that, or we don't, and only then can you have that trusted relationship moving forward. It's got to be open and honest.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point. And probably a great one to finish on, I guess, which is you get the best out of any of these services if you kind of find one that really wants to kind of partner with you and be effectively an extended team and genuinely will kind of flex their service a little into what you need, as opposed to just being kind of a cookie cutter service.
Yeah, that's an awesome summary.
Cool. Thanks all, and hopefully see you all soon.
Keep safe.